So I want to just see a show of hands. How many people here recycle? Okay. How many people like recycling? Okay, so it's almost the same number of people. How many people would be sad if you couldn't recycle? All right. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about why recycling matters. It's a very unusual time in the United States right now because we've had a lot of market shock. We have been fortunate to have a really well-developed recycling system. Lots of parts of the world don't. But I think it's something that we really take for granted. And I want to talk about, I'm going to sort of pose a hypothesis that recycling is, we often think of it just as an environmental statement. But I think that recycling means a lot more. It's a way of cultivating behaviors, of cultivating a mindset that's a stewardship mindset that helps support our commons, but I would also say it helps create a commons, something that creates resources for our economy. It helps create behaviors that steward our commons, but it also is something that I think we enjoy, which is sort of one of the things that helps define commons. So I'm going to start out with a very depressing point of view. Oceans define our commons, and anybody who's picked up a newspaper recently knows that they're very much under threat, not just from things that are visible, but things that are from, microscopic fibers. We're eating them. They're everywhere. And while we think this might be something that only certain parts of the world suffer from, it's very much something that is present at home. Every city, rural county on the planet is contributing to this problem. And this is actually a park in Tennessee, and it's pretty standard fare of what you see. And it's sort of indicative of the fact that we typically think we're doing a good job, but the science shows us that we're not. We can see it. Our LCAs don't account for the losses from the system. And this is one of the real dangers of thinking that when we do a product and packaging life cycle, that it's actually giving us all of the answers, because we know it's not. We can see it, and we see it accumulating faster and faster. So very, very few people think of recycling as being part of the commons, but I would challenge you that it very much is. I think historically, all we do is think of recycling as an environmental action. We focus on, are we having a greenhouse gas benefit? Are we saving resources? What we don't tend to think of are the environmental benefits of it. And they're substantial. They're the direct environmental benefits of it. It's a large scrap industry. There's a lot of jobs associated with it. The scrap industry itself is a $17.5 billion industry. But the cascading benefits of that economic benefit support our auto industry. It supports the secondary aluminum industry. A lot of our primary industries are no longer here in the United States. So there's a lot of indirect economic benefit. I think we tend not to think of that. But probably even further sort of from our minds are the societal benefits that recycling have. And that's the benefits in our community. And I think people who sit in the position of a recycling coordinator or a solid waste manager in a city, they're probably in the position of really dealing with this most on the day-to-day. And I'll give you just a little bit of a for instance in New York City. New York City is the largest megacity in the United States, no landfill. So they don't really have a close local place to put their garbage. So they're always making a decision of like, where does our stuff go? How much do we pay for it? Or do we divert it to recycling? There's a large cost to them. They have $1 billion solid waste budget. So recycling is very important to them. And obviously that goes up. More people, more garbage. They're always thinking about trade-offs. Other cities who have landfill restrictions have the same types of considerations. New England is one of those places, parts of the West Coast. So they're constantly trading off on what are the right decisions. Our LCAs don't tend to think about those types of decision making. So recycling is something that has a lot of community benefit, cleaner streets. You have the stewardship benefits, and that we have known from looking at cities that have had programs for a really long time. Some of the cities that have had recycling programs for 20 plus years have had, behavior change where you see the stewardship behaviors have sort of grown and grown over time. And the programs perform better and better over time. Cities that have sort of new programs, you see sort of the lowest level of performance. So one of the reasons I think this is really important now is that obviously a common like the ocean doesn't have boundaries. Things that happen on one side of the ocean are impacting us. And the issue of ocean plastics is particularly important these days. This is a diagram that shows the fate, the production and fate of plastics since 1950 to 2015. And the thing I really want to focus on is that about 39% of all of those plastics have gone into packaging. It's quite a lot. But when you look at where they've gone, only 9% of all plastics that have ever been made have been recovered through recycling. A very, very small number. Most of them have gone to landfill or released to the environment. Now, regulations that required engineered landfills only came into existence in about the 1970s. And the countries that actually have engineered landfills are the United States and Western Europe. Most of the world, including most of the most populous countries in the world, don't have engineered landfills. So, as a consequence, we see a lot of release to the environment. The materials that are most persistent and cumulative in the environment are plastics. So this is a concern, and we're probably only seeing the tip of the iceberg. So let's pivot and talk about what's happening to recycling today. Some of you who were in a session yesterday probably heard a bit about the China ban. Excuse me. So over the past, 5, 10 years, there have been a lot of efforts on the part of China to, let me go back a little bit. The US recycling system has grown rapidly over the last 15 years or so because we've been able to export a lot of our collected recyclables to China. The fiber industry in particular has benefited from that. However, there's been a lot of problems with contamination in our recyclables. Over time, China has implemented a number of policies, one called the Green Fence, that required us to clean up the material that we exported to China. However, lots of bad press, issues around corruption, some very unflattering documentaries about the waste and recycling industry in China. The government finally said, we've had it. And last summer, they went to the WTO and announced that they would be formally implementing a ban of 24 scrap materials. And those aren't unusual materials, they're basically everything that you put in your single stream bin. Anything from newspaper to mixed waste paper to corrugated cardboard, PET, you name it. They've banned it all. And the way they've implemented the ban is by saying that it's a quality standard, that they will not tolerate more than 0.5% contamination in these bales. That is a very, very strict standard, and no material recovery facility in the US can actually meet that standard. So it's effectively a ban on any exports to China. So this has been a sea change in the recycling industry, and with lots and lots of impact. And in a lot of ways, you can't really argue with it, because along with this ban has come a policy announcement from China saying that they are going to focus on their own circular economy. And it will be focused on their own megacities, of which there are many, many of them. And they're going to start with commercial recycling. That is a very commendable thing to do, because China really needs it. They need to work on basic solid waste management and recycling. They've also implemented EPR as a mechanism to finance the development, of their recycling system. But this is a change. It's going to be fundamental to recycling in the US. So the impact is that in the last year, we've seen the net value of single-stream recycling plummet, almost by 50%. So I think that the thing I think most people don't know is that about 50 to 60% of what we recycle is paper, or some paper commodity, whether it's cardboard, newspaper, office paper. It's about 50 to 60%. So MRFs make their money by recycling paper. Now they don't have an end market for that paper. So lots of questions around that industry, where that fiber is going to go, what are the markets for that fiber. So on the bottom there, you can kind of see the blended ton of single recyclables has gone from 78.55 to 40.72. So that loss for a MRF, that's a very, very big economic loss for them to bear. And you can see that the consequence of this is huge commodity oversupply in the market right now, particularly for fiber. And we're looking and estimating about $1.5 billion loss across the industry. That's a really big number in this industry. That we're going to probably see MRFs go out of business this year, and so real constriction in the market. But not all commodities are equally impacted. The plastics commodities have held up relatively well, and part of the reason is we do have domestic end markets here in the US. PET and HDP in particular have held up well. We have a number of PET reclaimers in the US. Aluminum has done very well. We have a strong aluminum secondary market here in the US. And likewise, steel has done relatively well. Tariffs are not helping, but needless to say, they're doing much better than the fiber. So it's an interesting time to be looking at commodities, looking at procurement. But then as you move back, what is this doing to community programs? I don't know, do any of you live in the Northwest? Yeah, you're probably seeing your programs changing. The Northwest is particularly hard hit because they have a deep dependence on exports to China. So what we're seeing is programs are changing. Communities are saying we can no longer collect certain materials, or they're collecting and then giving their operators permission to dump or to put them in landfills. So, that is a result of not having markets for some of these materials. So, this is a conundrum. If you are a consumer-facing company and you sell products, you have undoubtedly had feedback from your consumers that they want to recycle. I think you all in this room just confirmed that. People like to recycle. Millennials like to recycle. Gen Z really, really likes to recycle. And we see this trend becoming more acute. That recycling seems to be this gateway behavior, the small step people understand and they think it makes a difference. And it's what our commons need because it helps create this stewardship behavior. And I think our communities need it, our common areas need it. So fundamentally, what we're seeing today is that recycling doesn't exist without markets. We need to have markets for materials. We need commitments from end users to use recycled and reclaimed materials. Doesn't have to go back into packaging, can go into durable goods, can go in anything. But companies that are reclaimers need commitments from companies. And procurement is that signal. So I think it was really interesting to hear Judy call it impact sourcing because from my side, it's an end market issue. So the commons need stewardship, as do people, as do all the animals that rely on them. And as I think we hear a lot about the circular economy. Today, the US in particular is not very circular. We don't do a very good job. I think the level of stewardship in our society is relatively low, but it's something that we aspire to. And we don't aspire to it just for an environmental reason. We aspire to it for the economic reasons. We aspire to it, I think, what Sam was saying, for social reasons, for other reasons. And I would really emphasize for some of the stewardship reasons that I think are really important, that culture, that behavioral reason. Excuse me, I have something stuck in my throat. That I think recycling is really a part of. So some of the things that I think those of you who are in procurement can do is talk to your suppliers. They are often the most knowledgeable about where the opportunities, thank you, about the opportunities to use recycled materials. Challenge them, open innovation, ask them, is there a place where we could make a commitment to using materials? If you have product development teams that are trying to use materials, but often they face hurdles. Some of those are financial hurdles. There might be a cost premium to using them. Work with them. Figure out, you often have insights in either developing a justification or understanding of financial mechanism to help them overcome those hurdles. Some of those means, there are reasons outside of the direct financial reason why you might want to do something. This gets to sort of the innovative strategies, but is there contract language that you can develop? Are there product specifications you can embed in a contract that would be helpful, that would help drive this and help you become an end market for materials? And I think in this particular market today, there are some interesting opportunities. Both within the plastic side, certainly for some of the plastics that we're dumping or tipping into landfills, but in the fiber markets in particular, there's a lot of availability, and there might be, favorable conditions on the pricing side. So, I think that's all I had for you. Thank you.